Hi, my name is Kim Jacobsen. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm an attorney, and at the age of 51, during a global pandemic, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. This video blog is one of a series of blogs that I've put together to share my experience with early Parkinson's disease, to raise awareness, and to give information about my story. This is not meant to be legal advice, although I am an attorney. It's certainly not to be meant to be medical advice. I am not a doctor. I have no medical credentials at all. I just wanted to share my story and hope that it would be helpful to some people who were interested in it. This particular chapter is probably the hardest for me to do. I'm going to be discussing my mental health, which is obviously very personal to me. But I think it's important because lots of people with Parkinson's disease have anxiety and depression. I don't know whether it is a chicken or egg situation. Does the Parkinson's disease itself and the lack of dopamine in your brain cause anxiety or depression? Or does the symptoms of Parkinson's disease or knowing that you have a non-curable disease cause anxiety and depression? Who knows? Maybe one day they'll find out. But until then, I'd like to share my story. And my story goes back about 1.5 to 2 years prior to being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. I'd always been kind of not a very emotional person, very logical. My career sort of dictates that. I had friends who I enjoyed doing things with, but we didn't have necessarily deep conversations about our feelings about things. Yeah, that was me. I was just a person. I was going by my life. I was pretty satisfied with my career. I had a couple of good friends. I had supportive family. And life was good. Life was great. And then probably around when I turned 49, things started getting a little wacky. I was going through menopause at the same time. I was turning 50, so there's probably an aspect of a midlife crisis going on there. I was facing an impending empty nest, or I thought I was going to have an empty nest. The pandemic kind of changed that all. And, you know, the usual things with having kids that are in high school and college and the stress of all that, it was kind of taking a toll on me. And I had this terrible period of insomnia. I just could not sleep for anything. And I just assumed that that was the hormones related to menopause. And I had been a great sleeper all my life. Like actually in the past, how I handled stress would be I would just sleep. I know that's like, some people wish they were like that. I sort of wish I was still like that now. But I had never had trouble sleeping before in my life. So this was kind of a new period for me. And I was really functioning on very little sleep. I maybe would go to bed at 10 and wake up at 1 and be up for the day, or sometimes wake up at 3. And I was driving in work and I was exhausted, and sometimes I would have to leave work early because I was afraid that I would fall asleep and wouldn't make it home. There was a danger aspect to the driving to work and the insomnia as well. And I was having like these, what I thought were heart palpitations. I just felt like pounding in my chest. And I didn't know if that was related to a heart condition. I thought maybe I was having heart issues. I just wasn't sure. So, and I also had like a pounding in my face. Like I felt like I had a constant sinus infection, but I had never had a cold or anything. It was just kind of pressure in my face. And I went to my doctor's office and I ended up seeing a PA there, and he did some tests for, he did an EKG, he did some blood tests for my heart, and I started crying in his office. And he said, you know, we'll send you to a cardiologist and they'll run the tests to see about the heart palpitations, and here's an antibiotic for your sinus infection. He's like, but would you want to see a counselor? We have a therapist in-house. And at that point I was like, okay, I'm going to do anything to feel better. I just feel totally cruddy. And I was very emotional at that time. I was having problems with some relationships that it just didn't seem logical to me why I was so upset with that. Anything anyone would say to me, I would take slight of, which was not my natural inclination. I was just being very, very sensitive. And I said, fine, I'll talk to the therapist. That would be great. So fast forward a little bit, you get an appointment with the therapist. So this therapist was in the same practice as my GP. And so she had appointments every 3 to 4 weeks, which if anyone who knows about therapy knows that probably isn't adequate for someone who's in crisis. But I made an appointment with her because I didn't really know like where to find a therapist, and they were recommending that I see her. So I made an appointment, and she did not face me. She sat at a computer like this and typed notes. And the real concern was I suicidal? Was I going to hurt myself? Which I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't going to hurt myself. I was just depressed and anxious, extremely anxious. So she talked to me about meditation and yoga, and her theory was she would see me every 3 to 4 weeks when she had a spot for me. But she kind of never really dug into any of the things that were bothering me. And I guess probably as a patient, or I wasn't a great person to be with her in therapy, because if she wasn't going to ask, I wasn't going to tell. And so I never really told her about any of the things that were bothering me. She never really asked, and the therapy was not really helpful at all. In the meantime, I did go to a cardiologist. They had me wear a heart monitor to try to say when the heart palpitations were going on. I clicked a button and slept with this thing, and they did more tests on my heart. I think they did an electrocardiogram, and my heart was good. So that was a relief that it wasn't hard, and that probably helped a little bit. But I still kind of wasn't sleeping great. I was still having trouble. So I talked to a friend of mine who had been in therapy for periods of time and who was using a therapist at that time. And she said, Kim, you don't have to stick with the first therapist. You could find another one. That it was like an aha moment. Wait, I have power in this situation. This person isn't helping me. I just wasn't clicking with them. They weren't making eye contact. Their office was very sort of sterile. I didn't feel comfortable. So I said, maybe I should get a different therapist. That is a good idea. And so I looked on this website that was recommended, Psychology Today. And if you are looking for a therapist, that is a great resource because you can see who is available, who is taking your insurance. They do give a picture of the therapist, so at least you have a visual of who you might be talking to, whether that would be someone you would be comfortable with. Not that a visual is obviously going to tell you all, but they also give a little blurb about their practice and how they handle things. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to find a therapist. A lot of therapists that people had recommended to me, they were not taking patients at that time. This is a problem with the mental health system in our country. A lot of people have problems with their insurance covering therapy. Then it's a little bit of a crapshoot to find a good therapist, someone that you connect with. It's not like seeing a cardiologist where, all the cardiologists are probably going to do basically the same test on your heart. They're going to give you similar service. There's standard of care that's not so broad. But with therapy, it's very, very personal, and you're going to either click with someone or you're not going to click with someone. So I really suggest if you've tried therapy and that hasn't worked out for you, try again. There's someone out there that can work for you. So the second therapist I went to, that is someone I still see today and I really adore. I went into her office. There was a couch. She was sipping tea. She was not taking notes on a computer. She was quite frankly not taking notes at all. We were just having a conversation. And what I did, which I also suggest that if you're going to go to therapy, you do, is tell them the truth about what's bothering you. Because if you don't tell them the truth, they can't help you with the problem. I was very, very nervous to tell the truth about things that were bothering me because they seemed kind of petty or silly or some issues that I felt like as a 50-year-old woman, I should be able to get over and not be like worrying and having to talk to a therapist about it. But if you find someone that you click with, that you feel comfortable with, you can pretty much tell them anything and they're not going to be judgmental about what they're telling you. And once you feel that, it's like a wave of release. You could talk to someone, and it's better than talking with your friends because you don't have to worry about what they're going to think about you afterwards because you're actually paying them to talk to you. It's not easy. It's a really, really hard thing to do. But if you feel comfortable with going to therapy, I definitely recommend, if you can't find someone good the first time, try again, and maybe a second or third time too. Just keep trying. That being said, it's not easy to find a good therapist. I'll totally admit that. So I spent a lot of time in therapy, but I was still not sleeping. I was still having a lot of trouble sleeping. I resolved some of my personal issues, but I just still felt like so anxious. Like I would go to work and I would call my husband up a few hours later and I said, I don't know how I'm going to get through the day. I'm like so nervous. My heart is beating out of my chest. He's like, take a walk, move. And I would take a walk and then I kind of be fine, but it was not enough. The therapy was helpful. Took a lot off of my burden off of me to be able to talk about things, to try to resolve interpersonal issues and whatnot. But I still felt so anxious just all the time. And I went to my doctor and I said, I'm not sleeping. You need to give me a note that I can get out of work. And I've been seeing this GP. She's really amazing. And I've been seeing her for probably 20, maybe even 30 years, since I was in my 20s. And she said, Kim, I'll write you this note, and I'm glad you're in therapy, but she's like, this is not enough. You are not doing enough. And I really want you to try to go on an antidepressant, anti-anxiety med. And at that point, I almost felt like I didn't have a choice, which I don't know if that was good or bad. And I said, okay, I'm going to try it. She's like, okay, here's your FMLA note. Get you out of work so you can catch up on your sleep, but we need to do something more. And so it's very interesting. And I've learned a lot about SSRIs, which is, the meds that I eventually went on, is that there's not a lot of research out there that they can say, this med is going to work for this person, because it has to do with your internal brain chemistry. And so anytime you start an SSRI, and this is probably something that's not going to make people happy if they're thinking about starting an SRI, but it's only about 30% likely to work for you. In other words, you may need to go through a series of SSRIs until you find the right one. And some of them have bad side effects and make you feel really miserable. And you just need to be able to be patient with the process of getting on an SSRI. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. She first put me on, I got to look at my notes, sorry. She first put me on Lexapro. And I guess that is the most common med that people put middle-aged women on for whatever reason. And I could say the Lexapro worked somewhat. It worked more in the afternoons for me, and I kind of played around. A lot of people take it at night because it makes them drowsy, SSRIs. For me, I can't take the SSRI at night. It actually does the opposite of make me drowsy. It kind of gives me a burst of energy. And so I found for me taking them in the morning is just a much better thing. But the Lexapro in the morning, this is again, not medical advice, but just personal to me, I still kind of had that pounding in the morning. And then by like 11, 12 o'clock, I started feeling a lot better. I'm like, wow, there's something kind of to taking these meds, but it would be nice if this could work like all day long and not just in the afternoon for me. And I'm an early morning person. I start work at 7 o'clock. And so those 3 hours were really difficult for me until the meds kind of kicked in. So I went to the doctor maybe 6 weeks later and she's like, well, how's it going? And I said, I feel like it's working, but it's just not like working great. And she said, well, let's try something else. And she's like, let's try Paxil. So I went on Paxil, and that just didn't work at all. I was anxious all the time. I'm like, oh, I should have stayed on the Lexapro. At least I got to have a day out of that. I was like, oh my God, this is like exhausting. So I went back to her and I'm like, no, this Paxil, this is not working. We got to try something else. She's like, you know what? I've tried 2 meds. I'm just a GP. I'm not comfortable with this. You really need to see a psychiatrist to do med management. And I said, okay, so who do you recommend? And she gave me a few names and I called them and no one was taking new patients. Called some more, no one was taking new patients. I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So again, I went on to Psychology Today, and what I learned is there's many psychiatric APRNs out there who will do med management. Again, they're very difficult to find and get into. And so I found one actually who was recommended third hand by a friend. A friend had heard from a friend that this guy was good. And so I went to him and I said, you know, I've been through 2 rounds of SSRIs. I need, you know, to find a better medicine for me. I'm just really going to work that out. I have a therapist who I'm very happy with, who I'm working on my problems, my emotional problems, but she doesn't do meds and I need you to do the meds. So he was kind of an odd guy. And he said pretty much, the only thing he said to me that really rang true is the meds are pretty much a crapshoot. You have to go through rounds of them, see what works, see what doesn't work. So he put me on Zoloft, which was actually the worst med I was on. I was more anxious and more depressed than I had been when I was on no meds. And so I took that for like 2 or 3 weeks and I called him. I'm like, I need to go off this. This is not working. He's like, okay. And he talked to me about weaning off of that. Then I went to see him again, and eventually he put me on Luvox, which is the med I'm on right now. And for me, that med was just the right med. It helped, just take the edge off, lower the anxiety. I still had some pounding in my chest at times when I got anxious about certain situations, but I could see it was a little bit more situational than just anxious all the time. And I continued to see him because you have to follow up with the med management he was seeing me every 3 months. And he was just kind of a weird dude. And he started to talk to me about the 7 highly effective habits of working, and kept talking to me about my work anxiety. And finally I said to him, I'm like, I have a therapist. I don't need to talk to you about work. I'm good. I really just want you to do my med management. And soon after that appointment, I got a letter from him terminating my services, saying we weren't a good fit. And I was kind of like shocked. I'm like, I need this guy. I need someone to do my med management. It's super hard to get someone. And he didn't really leave me with any options. He gave me a few referrals, but I was like, am I going to call people that he's referring me to after he told me he didn't want to see me anymore? And so I did a little digging. And what I found out was he was billing my insurance company for therapy, which I didn't ask him to give to me. And so I kind of called his bluff and said, the gig is up. I don't want therapy. And I think he felt uncomfortable that he couldn't no longer bill my insurance company. And it took me a long time to figure that out. I had to actually look through the bills and then dig through the insurance codes and then match up the insurance codes for what he was billing my insurance for. This is, again, like why our medical system is so messed up. Because if there's not enough incentive to just do med management and you have to then do therapy to make up for the money, but your client doesn't want therapy, you shouldn't be doing the therapy. Like, to me, that was just unethical. Fast forward, I was able to, luckily I had a good 90-day supply of the Luvox, and I was able in those 90 days to find an APRN who would just do med management with me. And that's just worked out perfectly. She's been doing it. Actually, she meets with me like every 3 to 6 months, and we do it right on a virtual phone call. It takes 15 minutes of my time. She's appropriately billing my insurance. There are good people out there. And I have to tell you, there's also hope, because I felt so much better on the Luvox, and that really, I have to say, once I got diagnosed with Parkinson's, I'm really glad that I was on the SSRI, because although the diagnosis obviously took me for a loop, I truly believe I wouldn't have come out of bed for weeks if I hadn't sort of managed my mental health before I got the Parkinson's diagnosis. So now I've talked sort of about just my mental health issues before Parkinson's, but I want to now tie those into things that have been going on post-diagnosis. So once I got the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, I think initially it would be understandable that anyone who got this diagnosis would be depressed. And I definitely was depressed. I had a few weeks of a pity party, and I was like, am I going to die? What's going to happen to me? Am I going to see my grandchildren? Am I going to be able to play with my grandchildren? Am I going to be able to smile at my grandchildren? It just, you go through the whole sort of gamut of, I had an idea what my life was going to be, and now I have this incurable disease and my life is going to be very different. Or is it going to be very different? Am I going to make something out of it? And so I think that I just really would have spiraled out of control had I not been on the SSRI, been in therapy, when I got the Parkinson's disease diagnosis. So again, we don't know. Does the Parkinson's cause the anxiety and depression itself? Or is it the pain that you're in that causes the anxiety and depression? Is it the sleeplessness associated with the disease that causes the anxiety and depression? I don't think anyone really knows that, but I think the symptoms of Parkinson's can definitely cause the anxiety, depression, and having a disease can definitely cause anxiety and depression, but perhaps having a lack of dopamine in your brain, which causes joy, can also cause anxiety and depression. I have to say, once I got the Parkinson's disease and I started an exercise routine and I started carbidopa-levodopa, which is the drug I take for Parkinson's, what I noticed was a lot of the things that I thought were associated with anxiety, like the throbbing in my chest and the throbbing in my face, were probably internal tremors, and the Parkinson's meds made those tremors a lot better. And so I felt a lot better. And finally I was sleeping, so I felt a lot better. And eventually, once the drugs kicked in and I was on an exercise routine and I was eating better, which I'm going to talk about in my next video blog, I feel more like myself. And I feel really happy, even though I'm in a pandemic, because I have a very full life. I'm connecting with people. I am working full time. I'm teaching at night. I am singing in 2 virtual choirs. Yes, shout out to Rock Voices. That's a virtual choir that I sing with, that if you're interested in that, email me separately and I'll tell you about it. It's really amazing. And I have just a really full life of family and friends that have been really, really supportive and helpful to me during this situation. And I guess it's kind of a weird thing, but knowing there's a problem with my brain kind of made me feel better about having mental health issues. And I don't know if that's justified or not, but in some ways, for me, that was helpful. It's very interesting, and I'm going to talk more about Dr. Mishley in my next blog, but she did a study on diet, exercise, and on social quality of life. And she found that your social health is really the most important aspect for your quality of life with Parkinson's. More important than diet, more important than exercise. And I think there's something to be said about that there's positivity and connectivity really make a huge difference in your Parkinson's journey. And I hope I continue that positivity and connectivity as I age with this disease. I also want to tell you that I know that I'm extremely privileged. I have great medical insurance provided to me by my employer. I have money, so I have access to great care. And I know those are two things that a lot of people don't have. And so I don't want to be dismissive of people that are in a different situation. And part of my advocacy here is that that shouldn't be the case. The fact that I shouldn't have better medical care or better access to anything because of who I am or where I work or the color of my skin, quite frankly. And I know I'm privileged, and I admit that regularly, but it's just been lucky for me, and I feel very, very blessed. I also want to say that I also understand that medication is not for everyone, and it's not helpful for everyone, and not everyone can take medication or tolerate medication. Some people are able to use exercise or other things to help with their mental health and don't need to go on SSRIs. So it's not the solution for everyone, and I wouldn't want you to think that. But I really just want to end this with anyone who is, suffering from these issues. I hope you reach out to someone or something that can help you with it, because you don't have to be alone and you don't have to sit in the anxiety and depression, and there is hope. Love and peace. I hope you've enjoyed this video blog, and I hope to talk to you again soon.